I spend a lot of time thinking about how to make as much money as possible off an acre. And farming by nature is pretty extractive, so I wear that hat, but then I also sort of balance that with concern about, what moves through the placental, the blood, the barrier between the placenta and the mom and the baby, and, what moves through breast milk to baby. So I think a lot about those intersections, and I try to bring that to my work here in the legislature.
Yeah, work there. Hey, Dorothy.
We're working on
You're good.
My name is Dick Campbell. I represent District 19, which is Holden, Eddington, and Orrington. I am a freshman, of the third term. I've been in the legislature since 1992. I've served on DNR for, this will be my fifth term, and pretty excited about the environment. I've been in the energy efficiency, passive solar, green business for 30 years, contractor. And the environment is extremely important. With passive solar, it's basically good orientation, get the heat in and keep it in. So trees are important. Also, southeast and west. Every lot has it, so you can capitalize on energy that's free. And hoping that be creative with public policy and not invasive, not to doubt over our skis, and ramifications of our actions are positive and negative.
Station for Commerce. We're here with everyone this morning. I want to give a special thanks to Money and State and Phil for moderating it. I am a senior government relations specialist with the Chamber. I cover energy and environmental issues, which
One family I went had wrote books and
I live in a town where we have a waste to energy perk. And yeah, I'm concerned that we aren't looking beyond the solar and wind for renewables. I had a bill in to put waste to energy in, but have since learned that it is at a lower level considered renewable. So there are a lot of sources to create energy that we need to be pursuing. But conservation is what I've been involved with for the last 50 years. There are new ways to create envelopes, a living environment from homes to commercial, industrial. So my hope is that through both this committee and I'm also on the select committee for housing, we can be creative and encourage innovation and concepts that are new and unique instead of mandating particular concepts that we all think work, but they may not.
So Pete has a few slides that he wants to present in his presentation.
Okay, glad to be here. Before I get started, I just want to recognize a few of our staff who are here, including our new CEO, Rebecca Sanders, who's in the bag, Jack Tapiro from our clean energy team, also Sarah Nichols and Vanessa Berry, who are part of our Sustainable Maine team, and Vanessa's on the board of E2 Tech. So thanks for the opportunity to share some of our priorities, and I'll offer a few predictions. So legislature's back in session. As everybody knows, it was off to a little bit of a slow start with orientation sessions and agency briefings, but it's picking up steam quickly, and pretty soon it will look like this, with everything happening everywhere all at once. So those of you who are movie fans will understand the reference to the film with the most nominations so far. And over the next 4 months, it's going to be like this, with hearings, work sessions in multiple committees simultaneously on a whole lot of bills. We got a lot to talk about, more than 2,100 bills introduced. Many of those are concept drafts. We don't know what they are about. I'm not sure that the sponsors know in some cases what their bills are about, but there's a lot in those bills. And no, I think it might be the case. So
What they're about, what the content.
yeah, we don't know what we know the title is about. So I have gone through that list, identified 277 bill titles and pulled out just kind of the themes. And this is a word map of what it looks like. So there's a lot of topics that pop out from those bills. Some have been mentioned already: energy costs, mining, PFAS, transportation, rail, bottle bill, recycling, lake protection, solar efficiency, lots of bills. So there'll be a lot of legislating ahead. Here's my first prediction. I believe that 2023 will be another good year for the environment at the State House. And I say this for a bunch of reasons. The momentum behind legislative action on energy and the environment remains strong, and it will continue. I believe that we're actually in one of the most creative, innovative periods of energy and environmental policymaking in the last 40 years here in the state. There's a lot of good policymaking and discussion, and that's appropriate for a state like Maine. It's consistent with what people of Maine want, and consistent with the identity of the state. So a lot has changed at the State House. I'll describe 53 brand new members of the House, 16 returning legislators like Dick Campbell and Dave Woodson, who's moved from the Senate to the House. And there's historic increase in diversity at the State House. And that's very significant. The first Black Speaker of the House, the first 2 Somali Americans elected, the first Black state senator. That's important for the whitest state of the nation. But the partisan balance in the state has not changed. There was really no significant change in the party control of the House and Senate. So that fundamental ratio in the House and the Senate are the same. Committee leadership remains very strong, and arguably even stronger on energy and climate issues than the previous 4 years. And the governor and her team are still in place, and these issues remain top priorities. So those fundamentals lead me to believe that there's going to be some very significant bills passed this session. And those bills are going to build on a body of progress that has been achieved in recent years. We've passed a lot of very significant bills recently, and I think we will continue to implement these, which is extremely important. And we will build on these, and there's some new topics that are coming forward. So let me shift quickly through some of NRCM's priority bills. The bottle bill was mentioned. This is a picture of Angus King at age 31. He was a lawyer hired by NRCM at the time to help pass the bottle bill. A lot has changed for Angus and for the bottle bill since then. It has since become one of our most important recycling programs, but we do need to increase the handling fee through a bill that Senator Carney's introduced. There's also opportunities to make the bill more efficient, the program more sustainable through a bill that Representative Allison Hepler has introduced. We've already mentioned lithium mining. There's at least 8 bills. They cross a spectrum. NRCM strongly believes that protective standards need to be kept in place for any mining in the state for lithium. And I think here's a second prediction. I think that we're about to learn how little we actually know about lithium mining and how little we actually know about this deposit. And until we understand much more than we do now, I think we need to be careful moving forward. We're very involved in wind power. We're strongly supportive of the bill that Senator Mark Lawrence has introduced that was rolled out recently. We think that port development is a critical issue. There's a number of bills across the spectrum dealing with port development, strongly supportive of a number of other renewable energy bills, including Senator Vitelli's on solar procurement that also has a component dealing with storage. There's also a couple of solar siting bills that we've discussed, and the heuristic project authorization bill that'll be coming forward. Also strongly supportive of a $30 million trails bond that'll be in the appropriations committee. This is an opportunity for Maine to move up to a top tier in the country for our trails. And this is going to be supporting design, construction, maintenance of non-motorized, motorized, and all-purpose trails. And there are literally dozens of other significant bills across issues like lake protection, loon protection, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, transit, many other issues. But this gets me to the prediction that probably all of you are waiting for, is who's going to walk down the red carpet at the end of this session and receive the Oscar for advancing Maine's energy and environmental policies the most. I would put my bet on maybe someone on this panel who I might be sitting next to. But these are some of the contenders who are offering some very significant bills this session. We won't really know who the Oscar winners are until the curtain comes down and the show is over. So stay tuned for live and streaming performances. Many of you will be performers in this process, and thank you for your engagement as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Pete.
Yeah.
Ben, why didn't you talk about that?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Well, you've certainly already heard a great deal on a number of policies that the committee is going to be deliberating and debating on. I would imagine on all of those things in some capacity, the chamber will be weighing in. We represent a very diverse group of members that touch on all different sectors of the economy. When you have over 5,000 member companies, you tend to find yourself in a lot of different policy conversations. But what I want to spend a bulk of my time talking about here this morning is Senator Bremer mentioned, which is dealing with PFAS. That is going to be the chamber's top priority in the Environment and Natural Resources Committee this session. It'll probably be our top priority in the entire legislature. Before I speak on PFAS, I always like to, the chamber understands the concerns around PFAS. We understand the sensitivity of it. We want to help be a part of the solution. We think it's critical that the chamber is involved in every policy conversation, which is dealing with PFAS to seek address the problem. We've all heard the tragic stories and heartbreaking stories that have come from the farming community. We want to be involved to help solve that aspect of it, but just make sure that policy is enacted in a way that doesn't, cripple our business community, our economy, and the jobs that they provide. So, this session, when you're talking about in dealing with PFAS, we've seen off my count 20 bills that have been introduced in the legislature. Not all of them are going to the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. There are a few that'll go to Health and Human Services. There's one, I believe, that's going to go to health coverage, insurance, and financial services. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, as the representative and the senator have both mentioned. We have seen the legislature take a very proactive approach on addressing PFAS and problems that we've heard in Maine. We started seeing this policy pop up 2018, 2019-ish. And there's been a lot of well-intended legislation that's been introduced. A lot of legislation has been, very, very good, and there's some that has been challenging for the business community. And the one in particular that I'm referencing to is the PFAS and products law that was enacted back in 2021. This is our top priority right now as it moves through the regulatory proceedings and as we shift ahead to the legislature. Aware, back in 2021, the legislature enacted a law that would ban products offered for sale in Maine that had PFAS intentionally added by 2030. But even more challenging for the business community has been the reporting requirement, which went into effect on January 1st of 2023. When you're talking about testing and reporting hundreds of thousands of products for 9,000 different chemical compounds, that's going to take a significant amount of time. There are a lot of challenges that arise from that line in particular. The two biggest things that we see from our perspective is the business community is just going to need more time, and we just simply don't have the lab capacity to be able to test all of these products right now. There just isn't the technology available. I think we're making progress. We saw in the most recent budget that passed in the federal government, Senator Collins was successful in getting, I think it was $7 million in testing for the University of Maine. That is a very positive thing. We're hearing from some of our members right now who have made every intention possible to try and comply with this law, but they simply can't, given the current structure that it is on. I spoke to one business who has hundreds of products that they need to test. They couldn't find a lab. The closest lab they could find to test was in Pennsylvania, and they wouldn't be able to get to it for about 7 to 8 months. So what we're simply advocating for is this is a significant change. This is a first in the nation type policy, and it's the business community is just going to need time to be able to better understand how it's going to be necessary for them to comply with it. I think, again, it was a well-intended law that I just think is a little bit more broad than anyone anticipated when it was first enacted. It's going to be very, very costly for the business community in Maine to be able to test, report, comply with this law. And the current regulatory process has been very, very slow, and I don't fault the department for that. This is again, first in a nation type law where they haven't really been given a ton of guidance on what other states are doing. When you have a law that goes into effect on January 1st of 2023, but the rulemaking that was passed as part of the law hadn't even started yet. They just officially sent the rule to the board a week and a half ago, I believe it was. The board had their first meeting on it. So in our perspective, we think it's something that needs to be fixed. We need to be able to strike the right balance between by getting at what the goal of the legislation was, which is to limit the amount of human exposure to PFAS, eliminate PFAS from making its way into the waste stream, but making sure it's done in a way that doesn't significantly impact the business community and our ability to compete and manufacture in a global economy. So, like I said, there's going to be probably 8 or 9 pieces of legislation that are introduced dealing with this. There are certainly going to be folks who have a differing opinion on it than what the chamber's position is. That's okay. We respect that. We look forward to having a very substantive debate in the Environment and Natural Resources Committee and seeking to try and make sensible improvements to the law as it currently is written.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Senator, okay. Go ahead.
Yes, just to follow up on that point, I had two constituents call, one in the aircraft component business, who was forced to spend $7 million ahead of this law, and another lady who is in fabrics. And she was forced to buy $10,000, which is a big chunk for a small business, just to stay ahead of this.
Senator Brennan, this is teeing up a big issue for your committee. How do you see this working out? Is there room for accommodation to make this law work?
Well, I don't have the legacy that my colleague here in the House does in the legislature with regard to policymaking. But what I have learned in my short time at the legislature is we never get it right the first time, which is why we have this word amendment. So I do feel like there are tweaks that need to be made to 1503 to protect small businesses. The intent of the law was to really get to the root of source reduction of PFAS coming into the name. It's important for the state to have some capacity to understand what products contain PFAS. If nothing else, what we've learned in the last few months through the rulemaking process is that perhaps lots of products do, because there seems to be quite a bit of concern from the products industry about their products and whether or not they're willing to report that they have PFAS in them. So I feel like that should be remarkable and is a poignant place to place concern. And then we have a long runway to 2030 before this would be enacted, the no PFAS in consumer, no intentionally added PFAS in consumer products. So I feel like there's a lot of time for us to get this right, but the goal is to reduce the source of PFAS coming into the state of Maine. We also need to understand what it's in so that we can create product stewardship programs that manage products that have PFAS in them so that we have proper places to dispose of them the way we dispose of mercury and lead in our state and other hazardous substances. And I think that it's prudent for us to make sure that we're not letting up on the gas pedal here. We've asked our wastewater treatment plants and our landfills to think about filtrating the leachate effluent from these spaces, and the more we pile in the PFAS with products, the more PFAS there's going to be there to filter. Now, it might be that there's a point at which we realize that those filtration spaces are places where we have an opportunity to collect PFAS and to break it down as technologies advance for us to be able to destroy the chemical components within the PFAS so that they're not dangerous for bench signs in the summer. And what I can tell you is there's a big leap from what happens at the bench around discovery and development of destruction of PFAS and what that looks like as we move into implementing it on a large scale and filtration at, like, say, Anson Madison wastewater treatment district. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I feel like we need to continue to be vigilant. I think it's appropriate for us to put pressure on everyone to participate in this conversation. We've spent over $100 million already as a state. This is taxpayer money. We're mitigating, cleaning up, and filtering water, clean water for domestic rural homeowners and schools, public water systems. So we can't let up now. It's appropriate for us to be vigilant, and I'm looking forward to working with the business community to get 1503 from last session into a place this session that works better for folks. But I don't think it looks like us not being concerned about what products have PFAS in them.
I think I was listening the other day, DEP mentioned the lab capacity issue.
Yeah, I can speak about that.
Yeah, I think there's.
So we in the budget last session, we set aside quite a bit of money to increase our testing capacity in the state. Bigelow Labs and another lab in Scarborough, who's, I'm sorry, the name's escaping me. There needed to be more coffee out back, and then I might have been able to figure it out. Anyway, so one of the things that's interesting about lab testing for PFAS is literally every component within the lab needs to be PFAS free. So that proves challenging, which is why there are not a lot of labs in the country, but more are emerging more are emerging. So in Maine, we'll have two new labs that'll be stood up this next year. In addition to one at the state level. The big conversation at the state level is whether or not that lab should be focused on health monitoring. So we need to be able to have a place where we can send blood for blood serum monitoring for human health. The impacted farmer community is going to need to be monitored, as well as homeowners who've been consuming PFAS contaminated water, as well as firefighters who've been impacted by the materials that they've been working with to keep us safe. So testing capacity is increasing, and we will have more coming online in the state. And the testing, you know, you can imagine there's all kinds of things that we need to be able to test. In the farming community, we need to be able to quickly understand what muscle tissue looks like if we're about to send animals off to slaughter, to make sure that they don't have too much PFAS before they're processed into meat. There is a period of time where you can lower the PFAS rate within those animals, and so we want to be able to know quickly what those levels look like, so that we can decide when to send them off to slaughter. We need to be able to test milk, plant tissue, feed for animals. So, I mean, the list of things is endless, but, you know, we're working towards that. That's part of this, you know, over $100 million that the state has spent so far.
Before Ben, I want to give you a chance to chime in.
Well done, Jim.
Senate Chair of the ENR.
I'll just say briefly, there's nothing wrong with being first in the nation on policies. I think Maine has done that a number of times, and we've provided leadership across many environmental policy issues by being first in the nation when the rest of the country has not moved as quickly as it should. I would say with the PFAS issue, we are moving ahead of most of the rest of the country, and we may not get it completely right with each step. And I have tremendous confidence in the Environment Natural Resources Committee's ability to listen to the concerns of the business community and the concerns of farmers and the concerns of Maine people to figure out what sort of adjustments might be necessary. But pressure on the system is necessary given our culpability as a state in providing approval for the spreading of PFAS contaminated sludge on farmlands, where farmers are now losing their ability to continue their profession. And the business sector needs to move more quickly than they have been in getting PFAS out of the products. So, and the science, as we know from our state toxicologist, is revealing that the level of harm occurs at even lower concentrations than we thought possible. But 4 years ago, PFAS wasn't mentioned once in the state budget. Last year was in it about 40 times. So we are moving rapidly, and I think it's an important area for us to be leading.
Great, thanks. Ben?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo something that Senator Brenner said and agree with her. I mean, we do have some time. And the other thing is, I don't think there was a recognition of how many products contain PFAS. You know, it's not like you can point to one single thing and look at you know, eliminating that one product. It's quite literally in pretty much any consumer household item you can think of, from clothing to cookware to pans to your electronics. It's in heart stents, pharmaceutical medications, it's in MRI machines, X-ray machines. I mean, we have heard from just about every sector of our economy and every sector that we represent at the chamber that there is probably some level of PFAS that is in their products. And there's a recognition from the business community that we have heard from companies who are looking for ways right now to see if they can manufacture their product by eliminating PFAS. But I would again just, you know, sort of emphasize it's going to take time for you know, companies to figure that out. We've heard from some companies it's going to take us 2 to 3 years to be able to go through all of our inventory when you're talking, you know, several thousand products and parts. And I think one of the things we have to get at, and I think one of the things that has made it very difficult is how we define PFAS. There's, you know, a EU definition. There's you know, EPA is trying to administer how PFAS is defined, and we've even heard it in Maine when the department presented the rule to the board. there was a little bit of pushback from the board of, well, can you give us a concrete number of, is it 9,000 different chemical compounds, is it 15,000? The Attorney General was in front of the Agriculture Committee yesterday, and they had this very same conversation about, we need to take a significant look at how PFAS is defined to be able to get at the root cause of the problem, which is, eliminating it from the waste stream as Senator Brenner alluded to. And, one other thing I just always like to say is, I use the analogy of there's sort of two buckets when you're talking PFAS. And in bucket number one, you have everything that has happened to the farming community. And we have the PFAS advisory fund. We've seen significant federal resources that have been allocated to make improvements to farmers who have had their lives uprooted. In bucket number two, you have the regulation of PFAS that is in everyday essential consumer products. And that's going to take a significant amount of time just to be able to comb through. But, the business community stands ready to lead on this issue and try and make as many improvements as we can.
And then give the senator the last word on this topic before we move on. Okay.
I appreciate that, Mr. Lucas, but I would also argue that there's bucket number three, which is all the clean water that Maine needs to be able to consume, including rural drinking water, public water sources, water students are drinking in schools. And it's crucial that we make sure that we have the capacity to, over time, lower the surface water and groundwater levels of PFAS.
Did you have something to add?
Yeah.
Good.
PFAS is a major problem, major. And we've only really known about the effects for about 3 years. There's a real good opportunity for Maine to lead, and I'm excited about dealing with it. But it hits all sectors of society. Municipalities are struggling. What do we do with this stuff? You fed it to us, we processed it, we put it in landfills, do we dry it, do we burn it, what do we do with it? And there are some solutions coming, but we're all focused on making the right solution.
I need to have another last word.
Okay.
Actually, I just want to correct it, or maybe embellish a little bit about the health effects. We've actually known about the health effects of PFAS for way longer than 3 years, which is the root of the problem. And that comes from chemical manufacturers, large chemical companies, 3M, DuPont, BASF. All these companies knew of the deleterious human health effects of these chemicals, except that they didn't report them to the EPA and the FDA. So this is and that's the basis for the bulk of the class action lawsuits against these companies, including the ones that AG Fry is mounting now. So these health effects have been known. It's just an issue of whether or not they've been transparent and presented to the public.
Some significant challenges there for sure. I want to open it up to the audience to bring up things that are coming top of mind for you guys right now. Is there a question from the audience that anybody have anything at this point? No, okay, then I'll keep going. Let's go back to climate change, because that's always top of mind in your committee as well. What type of activities do you see coming to deal with emissions from any sector or helping communities to deal with adaptation, things like that? Do you have some priorities in that direction, Pete, or any other?
Well, many of the bills are going to be dealing with emissions reduction, adaptation, other key components of the climate action plan are going to be not in the ENR committee. There is going to be a bill to address the site law standards for port development. That's an important bill. I believe is in your committee. But there's also port bills in the transportation committee. The appropriations committee will be dealing with a budget that has additional funding for the community resilience program, community partnership program. But many of the key bills are going to be at the EUT committee, your next panel, and obviously the solar and the wind bills will be there. So there are probably a few other bills that are coming before you that might deal with climate, but I think some of the biggest drivers are going to be at the energy committee through the appropriations committee also.
think the biggest one for emissions will be a rulemaking bill for the, for oil tank emissions, and that will come, it's a major substantive rule that'll come back to us for review. So we'll see how that, how that plays out in committee.
Okay. Were there any, I'm just trying to think, were there any funding bills to help communities do more with the climate change planning and adaptation? I don't recall it coming through your committee.
It's in the governor's budget.
Yeah, it's in the budget,
Last
though,
session,
so that'll
yeah.
come in some form this session, that'll come back to your committee, I assume, for review.
Yeah,
Correct, yeah, we'll see it in the AFA process.
You mentioned lithium mining, and Pete mentioned it as well. How do you approach something that seems so necessary, but has some challenges that people are alluding to, and how do we handle that?
Well, I think the starting point is to learn a lot more than we currently do. I think there's a very quick conclusion that we need to mine lithium everywhere all at once, but that's not actually the right way to go. About 72 other deposits in the country right now that are being looked at for lithium mining. There's a lot that we're still learning about the difference of environmental impacts between hard rock spodumene mining versus brine mining. There's there's something like 85 years worth of lithium in Nevada alone to meet even aggressive forecasts of lithium. We don't know much at all about what's in the deposit in Newry. The owners of that deposit have not revealed if they have even done any characterization of that deposit to depth or across the breadth of the deposit. We need to know that. We would need to know whether there's any reactive minerals in that, metals in that deposit that could cause sulfide drainage, sulfuric acid when it's exposed to water and air. So we need to hold any mining operation, whether it's for lithium or any other, to very high environmental standards, with the burden of proof on the owner of the deposit that the mining operation is not going to cause significant problems. We don't accept tailing ponds for any other type of mining. We don't know where the owner of this deposit plans on processing their lithium into a concentrate for the purposes of proceeding with commercialization of it. So there's a lot we don't know. So I think this year will be that will be exposed in a lot of ways, how many questions there are that need to be answered. And I believe we have an excellent mining law in place, and any modification of that should keep the high environmental performance standards in place for any type of mining, including lithium.
There's this dynamic tension out there about the things we want to do and the things that we are encouraged to do or mandated to do. So in terms of mining, it's got to be completely safe. We have to encourage the best processes, but it's difficult to look at solar and wind and push that on real hard. But what about the minerals necessary? And my concern is, what about the disposal of the solar products that have a life of 20, 22, 25 years, and we're not addressing that.
Ben, do you have anything to add on that topic?
No, other than, I agree with what Pete said. We gotta learn more. I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day. We're just starting to get calls into our offices at the chamber, the deposits that we found in Newry and the one up in Rooster County, I believe. I can't remember what town it was. So I would just agree with Pete that, we still need to learn more, but I expected something that the committee will take a hard look at. And certainly if there's a, way to grow the state's economy into a sort of new industry, and if it's done in a safe and responsible way to protect our natural resources in Maine, then that's, certainly something that we would be able to get behind.
Okay. I'm gonna pause again. Does anybody have a question from the audience? Question here.
Thank you. Dan Bozick from the Northeast Clean Energy Council. My question isn't about energy, it's about PFAS. A lot of small farmers use biosolids, and a lot of biosolids contain PFAS. And I think it was alluded to earlier that, this could put some of those, some small businesses at a tremendous cost. It certainly would put smaller farmers out of business if they had to take this all into account. And I'm just wondering if there's any plans for the biosolids parts of PFAS, or are there is there any way to transition to new chemicals or new ways of doing business? Thank you.
So last session, we did pass a bill that bans the spreading of land application of sludge and the use of biosolids on farms, land application of biosolids. So I don't have yet to see language for a bill that would reconsider that going forward, but the goal is to get to a place where we could perhaps reconsider using biosolids and sludge on land when we have less PFAS in the product stream and less PFAS in our waste stream.
Ben, did you have something or no?
No, she.
Yeah, so assuming also that manure spreading is still allowed,
Oh, yeah,
which is the traditional.
come by, I'm happy to let you give it a try.
The traditional way, right? Let's shift a little bit to, oh, we have a question.
Yeah, I had a question just to try to add to the lithium question.
Okay.
I'm aware of that lithium deposit for a long time, and I'm curious what the zeitgeist is of the Maine community about whether to mine that or not. And I would say I would offer too that I'm sure this is considered a strategic reserve of some kind for the country. And I assume the federal government would be weighing into these discussions.
So, he was asking, what is what's the mood or the temperature of I guess the legislature or Maine in general toward this strategic deposit?
Just very quickly, we don't know if it's a strategic deposit. There's a TNC report that identifies 72 current deposits around the country that are being looked at for lithium. We also don't know if hard rock lithium mining is the preferable way to go as opposed to brine extraction, which seems to have fewer environmental impacts. And we do know from the limited amount of characterization that's happened at this deposit that there are some reactive materials in it, lead sulfide is in it. And we need a lot more information about what other minerals are in that deposit and what the implications would be for extraction. And from that, learning what the environmental implications would be and how to manage that. And we need to find out where the crystals would go for processing. If it was going to be on site, then they would have to have dry stack processing of that. They need to be held at the same standards of existing Mineral Mining Act requirements. And they're currently, one thing we need to understand is no one has done this in about 50 years in the US. So it's not only that we don't know what we're talking about, there's very few people in the country that know what they're talking about when it comes to lithium mining. So we're not finding a lot of experts on this. And we just need to be clear that we need to be moving ahead cautiously. And we need to understand a lot more about the deposits.
Okay. How are we doing on time? Larry?
We're doing great.
Sure. Okay. You guys mentioned siting, you had port development, there's solar siting issues. We had a bill to do permit by rule with the site law for things that might be able to be done. What types of things are you thinking on the site law and siting issues that would help move the kind of change agenda forward or make it more amenable to doing the things that we need to do?
The bills that have citing in their title, I have not seen the language yet, so I'm not exactly sure what legislators are proposing. So I would feel, it would feel premature for me at least to speak about those issues, but perhaps you have.
I could just mention
thoughts.
So,
very Well, there's a bill of EUT, I think it's gonna be the EUT that's. Actually, I'm not sure who it's referred to, that's gonna have a mitigation component for wildlife habitat conservation. Sportsman's Alliance of Maine is supporting that bill. It'll be kind of like the mitigation bank for wetlands impacts, where developers would put money into a fund to help procure, purchase, protect wildlife habitat in exchange for the perimeter fencing that is around renewable projects that block off.
So that's interesting, that's under the NRPA fund, or I think it is, and that.
But I don't think it's going in, I don't think it's in your committee.
It should go to this committee.
Yeah,
Right.
I think
All right.
the reviser has tentatively sent it to the EUT committee.
Right, okay. I think we're getting close to time. Is that Phil?
Is that Bill behind the mask?
That mask man, Phil?
In the sky, Phil.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Yeah.
I'm Phil with Revision Energy. And I just wanted to quickly circle back to the great question about the waste stream related to solar panels. We're seeing an awful lot of those solar panels all over the state of Maine and all out throughout New England. And you mentioned a potential lifespan of 20 years. And I just think it's important to note that the modern solar panel comes with a 25-year warranty, and it's got about a 40-year expected useful lifespan. Revision Energy is just turning 20 this year, so the first systems that we put in 2 decades ago, they're still out there. They're chugging away and doing just fine. And I think it's important to note that there's a really robust recycling ecosystem that's grown up around the solar panel industry today. So we constantly have recyclers pounding on our door who want to pay us for end-of-life solar panels or damaged panels because they're highly recyclable. It's basically aluminum, glass, and silicon, three highly abundant substances on the face of the earth that are pretty easily broken down and reconstituted. But I think that's a really great thing to focus on is what are we going to do when these panels reach the end of life.
The opportunity for recycling panels in a coordinated way.
It already exists. And my reference point is, what about all the automobiles that we've driven for the last 100 years, right? We didn't have a way to cycle and digest that technology. It'd be littering the landscape all over the place, but it doesn't because we figured out how to digest it.
Yeah, and that raises a good point. It's not always something that the state government needs to do. If a system exists, they just need to make sure it's working. So, yeah. Great. I think we're getting close to the end here. So I want to thank our panelists. They did a great job. And we're going to switch panels now. Thank you.
That was great. Bill, thank you.
Good job, Ben.
Thanks, Marty. That was great.
All right, I'll try to drag everybody back. If you drive from Massachusetts, I think probably means a lot of us. We got a solar Prius 59X Massachusetts plate. This is blocking emergency vehicle. That might be okay in Massachusetts. I'll be like here.
Moving on to our energy committee panel. With us today is Senator Mark Lawrence, Representative Steve Foster, Attorney Tony Buxton, and Jeremy Payne from the Maine Renewable Energy Association. So I was just going to start off by having people give a quick bio of who you are. 1 minute. Mark, you want to start?
I'm State Senator Mark Lawrence. I chair the Energy Utilities and Technology Committee, and I come from Southern York County, which is I'm often called the state from the senator from New Hampshire. And I've been called a dirt lawyer by Buxton. I practice law down in that area. I've chaired the UT committee this is my third term chairing it now. And I've been in the legislature. I was in the legislature in the 80s and 90s, and then back in now for about 8 years, which sounds like a prison sentence, but it's not that way.
Representative Foster? Let's go, Bob.
For the record, the term dirt lawyer is a term of honor. I'm Tony Buxton. I'm a partner of Attorney Clarity. I co-chair the energy practice and the climate strategy practice. I'm here today representing Industrial Energy Consumer Group, but we'll talk about other things as well. I live in Portland. I have high hopes for Maine's ability to be a place where we do climate right.
Morning, everybody. Jeremy Payne, the acting executive director of the Maine Renewable Energy Association. I had held the full title for 14 years, but I'm stepping back, and so just in the acting capacity as they search for the next victim from the organization. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Steve Foster, Representative District 32 from Dexter. For most of you, that's Northern Maine. I can tell you, as I have to remind members of the EUT committee often, that is actually the center of Maine. I have friends that live north of Maine. I represent towns in that district from Dexter along the 45th parallel, east, Darwin, Charleston, Exeter, Stetson, and part of Bradford. I can tell you where my head's at most of the time. I drive down this morning and watch the temperature on my auto dashboard at -6 in Dexter, and I got a little bit excited about what's coming, thinking about the reduction in line loss we're going to see. Be some in this group that understand what I'm talking about. Professor Hill was still around, maybe Saturday morning, he would actually be able to put a dollars number to that savings. We will realize from the reduction in resistance.
Yeah, all the engineers in the world are excited. So Senator Lawrence, why don't you give us sort of an overview of what's coming before the committee this year?
Okay, I'll just give you a brief overview. Obviously, we deal a lot with electricity, and obviously the big issue is climate change and beneficial electrification. I see us dealing with net energy billing still. We're probably gonna have bills regarding electronic vehicles and charging stations. We're gonna have more bills regarding heat pumps and promoting heat pumps in installation in homes. We're likely to have some legislation around grid scale procurements. We're gonna have legislation around what was just recently, I don't think it's called the Northern Maine Wind Connection Project, or I forget the exact name. I do have a bill in for an offshore wind procurement, so I imagine we're gonna be dealing with that too as well. We always deal with things regarding poles and electricity poles. So
Anything on poles, right?
we'll have legislation in on poles. Then we have to deal with all the legislation around broadband. There's probably gonna be a lot around broadband and the new broadband commission and kind of what's going on and how that's being managed and how that's being directed. We'll probably have various legislation. We heard a couple yesterday regarding the PUC and reforming several things regarding the PUC, reporting requirements, different things like that. We'll have similar legislation. I know I sponsored a few at the request of the Maine Public Advocate. So various pieces of legislation around changing what they do. We'll have legislation around Efficiency Maine Trust and doing some changes to Efficiency Maine Trust. We'll have legislation on individual sewer districts around the state to deal with. We'll have legislation on individual water districts to deal with. And we'll also probably have legislation on 911, which is a system that also falls under us. So I don't know what we're going to be doing in our spare time, but that's a little.
You're not gonna have any.
I think total, if I remember right, I think it's around, if I remember the LRs that have been not to be referred to us, it's around 180 or 200 bills.
Representative Foster, can you speak a little bit toward the priorities that you're going to get forward to on the committee?
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to see from what I've in looking at bill titles that will probably be coming before the Energy Committee, that all of us in the legislature are looking at ways to contain costs for our ratepayers, residents of Maine. It's been a concern of mine. I am an engineer. I tend to look at things from a point of view of is this the best way to go? And can we do something that reaches basically the same goals without costing our ratepayers and taxpayers as much money? So I have seen bill titles on my side of the aisle. We'll be looking at net energy billing, as the senator said, and other items that have come back up. And I'm glad to see that there are also bills that we'll have a chance to look at that address some of the same concerns. As we move forward, we also, I believe our caucus will be presenting bills that would look at what else is out there that may get us to where we want to be 10, 20, 30 years from now, that offer opportunities of sustainable energy and possibly a long-term reduction in cost. So that's kind of where I think we'll be concentrating our efforts.
Tony, you want to provide your perspective on priorities?
Thank you. First, thank you to E2Tech for including consumers on this. Sometimes consumers get lost in the mix. IECG has existed for 37 years, representing large consumers, usually on the same merits as other consumers, but we consume a lot more, so it really matters. Our focus in this legislative session will be primarily on cost and getting Maine climate right. I invite your attention to the website, getmaineclimateright.com, which I think you will find to be a stunningly aggressive, beneficial electrification and climate mitigation set of priorities, and as or more aggressive than any other organization in Maine. We believe, the industrials believe, success is possible if we just decide to do it. For example, we strongly advocate for rapid expansion of heat pumps. And it's hard to use a heat pump in a paper mill. So it's for other people, it's for beneficial electrification. In that regard, I've passed out a document on each of your tables, which contains our economist estimate of the cost of the existing program of net energy billing. It is an astonishing set of numbers, and hopefully will not come completely true, but I think the die may be cast. And those costs, as the representative has indicated, are starting to appear in electric rates and will be entirely electric rates by 2025. And they will increase electric rates enormously. So part of this session will be focused on what the legislature might do about that. There also will be focused on what I would call net energy billing 2.0, which is a proposal to expand net energy billing, again, without a price constraint, again, without a limit on the total megawatts, again, without a limit on the effect on ratepayers, with smaller projects, but which nevertheless would perpetuate the existing model. Those costs threaten to destroy the ability that we have, which is precious, to encourage people to use electricity rather than more expensive and more polluting fossil fuels. If we make the same mistakes that Massachusetts has made, we will evaporate that. And any advances we then make in beneficial electrification, we will have to pay people to do. We, as the industrials, urge that we not miss that opportunity, that we use the abilities of the Efficiency Maine Trust, the Maine PUC, the Maine Legislature, Governor Mills, the current administration, to achieve those things that we can do soon, rapidly, effectively, to mitigate climate change. That is the challenge. In that regard, rather than just harp on costs, which frankly, Jeremy is probably tired of hearing me do, we are going to propose legislation to place in the PUC the responsibility to coordinate beneficial electrification. Right now, the legislature or others propose buying renewables, and we do. And then the Efficiency Maine Trust tries to get people to install efficiency devices and heat pumps. We think these two things need to move in parallel. We need to not only buy renewables, we need to use renewables. And right now, it's colder than hell, pun intended, in Maine. It's going to get worse. And we have far too few heat pumps. We have about 110,000 that the trust has stimulated, and there are certainly some more. But we have a target of 1.5 million. And we're never going to get there, not even in your lifetimes, let alone mine or the young senator to my left. We're not going to get there unless we put our money where our mouth is. We need to invest seriously in heat pumps. I want to thank Central Maine Power and Avangrid and the governor's office for helping to create the first 2 heat pump rates in Maine history. Right, we're making progress, but we need to do a hell of a lot more. So I hope you all consider helping out on making beneficial electrification the formal policy of Maine and having us move in parallel with renewables and using those renewables. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
So I'll just say the exact opposite of what Tony just said.
See what my life is, right?
So I don't think it's going to be terribly beneficial or interesting to have you all listen to Tony and I debate energy cost assumptions. Just about as entertaining as listening to my children argue over who gets to sit in the front seat of the car. So
I think I'd rather see that.
yeah. So certainly look forward to engaging in the conversations that Representative Foster, Senator Lawrence, and Tony have outlined. I think one of the things we haven't talked about is energy storage. And there is going to be a bill to do some type of procurement this session. We've done the study, we've had a study commission, we've talked about how we need to do energy storage, that we have intermittent resources that we could benefit from having a balance of, providing grid resiliency, do all of these great things, but we haven't taken the actual next step to put a policy in place that will make it happen. You know, from my perspective, and maybe this is an area where Tony and I may agree, which is, I think it's important to go a little slow on storage. We want to make sure we get it right. If we go too fast, design a program that costs too much and delivers too little, storage may die for some period of time. Maine policymakers, regulators, ratepayers alike, won't want to move forward with storage policy. So I think, you know, what we're likely to see is some type of pilot program, you know, exactly what the shape is going to look like, the structure, who's going to administer it, you know, that's a conversation that will of course take place in the gentleman's committee this session. But that's one area where I'm particularly excited about is seeing something finally move forward in energy storage.
Okay. I want to circle back to the senator and give him a chance to talk about his priorities for things he'd like to accomplish.
Yeah, I think you can see what it's like on the Energy Committee with a variety of perspectives. And I'll tell you, the Energy, Utilities and Technology Committee is one of the most heavily lobbied committees in the legislature. And the reason is because there's so much money at stake here. And there's a lot of people who have a lot invested in this, either and at risk in this. So they hire a lot of lobbyists who come in and tell us their perspective and their spin on what's going on. From my perspective, I think you've heard a lot of these different issues. And we have a fairly, just to give you an idea of the committee, we have many new people on the committee. I see Jerry Runte here, who came from the utility industry. And there are several other new people. I'm trying to look around so I don't miss any of the members. And then you have the old war horses like Steve and I, who have been around sitting on these issues. And it's a good combination of people because Steve talks about keeping things, you know, good for ratepayers. I talk about beneficial electrification, and hopefully we work out the compromises. For me, my big bill this year is going to be the offshore wind procurement. And that's kind of the next step of Habib Dagher's project for floating and offshore wind off the Gulf of Maine. And if we're able to do that, we're going to find an incredible source of renewable energy for Maine. I always give people this perspective. When I first came on the Energy, Utilities and Technology Committee, of the energy consumed in Maine, only 20% was electricity, 80% was other sources, and mostly carbon-based. Your car, your heating system in your house, various things. And our goal is to increase the percentage of electricity that comes from renewables, and also increase the amount of energy that is comes from electricity use in Maine. To do that, that's going to put pressure on our grid, pressure on our transmission and distribution systems. So we have to come up with an overall plan of how to do this, and it's not easy to do. And as Steve said, we have to keep ratepayers in mind too, but we also have to keep in mind that the reason why rates are high now is because we're addicted to carbon. Natural gas is what has driven our electric rates up so tremendously. And until we get to a system where the majority of our energy consumed in the state of Maine is through electricity, and we have it on renewable, non-carbon based sources, we will not get stability in our electric prices and predictability in our electric prices. And we will not do anything about climate change. So that's where I see trying to continue the progress that was made over the last 4 years in moving towards beneficial electrification. That's the goal of my goal for the committee, is to try to find ways to continue to do that during this 2-year cycle.
Great, thanks. One thing that comes to mind, when the PUC approved the contract for Northern Maine recently, Commissioner Scully made a point that a lot of that, that contract is being put on rates, and said, if this is an environmental benefit for everyone, we need to find other ways of financing these projects, not just the rates. Do you guys have perspectives on that? Who should pay for the beneficial electrification of these developments or procurements or things that are driven by public policy for the environment?
Steve, do you want to start off?
I will. I think that's a very good point that needs to be discussed and considered. The EUT committee and legislation that we passed is among, I believe it's the only legislation that, generally speaking anyway, that comes before us that goes through the legislature that's signed by the governor, which can put a financial burden on a very large portion of citizenship, most of whom are taxpayers as well, without any discussion on should we raise this tax or not, because it's not considered a tax. And when in effect, it serves the same purpose. We say, we want to do this, it's going to cost this much, and oh, by the way, ratepayers, including our grocery stores, our large industrial employers, and the mom and pop stores are going to have to pay this. And they have little opportunity to discuss this in a normal forum where, for instance, you want to raise the sales tax 0.5%. I have in my district, a farmer who has a well-known meat processing butcher shop plant. I see him at the annual town meeting in Charleston, and we have a little chit chat, and we've got along well, and he knows that I'm trying to represent his interest. I got a long text from him a couple of months ago, a long text, first time he's ever communicated to me, discussing what energy costs are doing to him and his big family business. He paid $80,000 in electric costs last year. This is not a big industrial complex. This is a farm with a butcher shop. He expects that that will go up to at least 100,000, and he's not sure how he's going to survive that. So it is something that I think we may want to look at, the legislature as a whole. How do we fund these beyond just asking the ratepayers to pay more? And I will also bring this up during committee Zoom hearing the end of last session. My good friend from Bodenham brought up the fact that maybe we need to start, as Representative Foster has suggested many times, we need to start considering what these rates are going to our ratepayers in Maine. Because he was starting to see that it was starting to become a significant portion of in their basic monthly budgets. I had to remind him that in my part of the state, it always has been a significant portion of the base of their monthly budget. And I referred to a state publication that had come out based on more than a year ago's financial situation, lots of numbers, but what they basically said was that in the southern counties in Maine, the average wage earner, not per capita, but the average wage earner took home or made $20,000 more than the average wage earner in the Penquist region where I had grown up and where I represent. Something that really shows the difference in how these policies and the effects that they have felt in central and northern Maine and rural parts of southern Maine as well. So I think that's a good point that needs to be considered in the future.
Well, before we go on, I have an announcement here. If you own a silver Prius with a mass plate 59XA99 or a blue Hyundai with a main plate 590ZH, your car may be towed. So you probably want to exit to go move it right now in the parking lot.
So one of those may be mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. In my brown coat out there, so somebody will have to get it. Hand coat about midway down the line. It's a nice car.
Good thing I announced it. Okay.
And you're accepting responsibility, Marty, right?
Back to our topic here, as
Yeah. So Steve raises some good points, and I think we do have to look at alternative ways. There's a lot of funding that has come in from the federal government. We have to look at different ways to fund transmission and distribution. But I want to remind you that we can do all we can to limit transmission and distribution costs. But that's not going to help Steve's constituent. And we can't pass a law in the state of Maine that says natural gas companies can't charge 3 times more for their natural gas, or oil companies can't charge more for their oil, or coal companies can't charge more for their oil. What has driven up the bill of Steve's constituent is not the transmission and distribution in the state of Maine. It's not CMP, it's not Versant. It is the supply side. Electricity from natural gas produced by natural gas tripled this past year. That's what has driven up electricity prices. And we don't have control of that in the legislature unless we move away from carbon-based fuels. And that's the only way we're going to get control in the long term. But we have to do it, as Tony and Steve and Jeremy have suggested, in a way that has the least detrimental impact on ratepayers in doing that transition. And if we can find alternative sources from the federal government, I say let's go for it.
Tony, thoughts on how to pay for all this?
Thank you. Carefully stated, hope is not an energy policy. An energy policy is success at increasing the scale of renewability and decreasing the cost. And we have those things within our grasp if we just decide to take them. If you and we could wish cap and trade in place, that would make a huge impact. But if we focus just on cap and trade, or on persuading the Appropriations Committee of the Maine Legislature to fund energy consumers to the extent they would need, that's hope, but it may not happen. In the meantime, all these furnaces, oil furnaces in Maine, are running full tilt right now, spewing into the air tons of CO2 that will be there for 100 years. We need to stop that first now, because we can do that. We have heat pumps. We know how to do it. The federal government will give us $8,000 per home, income qualified, for everybody in Maine to put in a heat pump. We should be going door to door saying, would you please sign this form so we can do a heat pump for your house and give you $6,000, $7,000, $5,000. That's what the challenge is for us. There are many things possible that don't cost a fortune. I would encourage you to take a look at the website of Competitive Energy Services, a energy firm in Portland, and see Dr. Richard Silkman's book about how Maine can get to zero carbon by his prediction without increasing what we spend on energy. Now, we may not all agree with all of the nostrums that it proposes. The important point is somebody actually thought it through and spent 2 years doing the modeling and showed us, for example, that Jeremy Payne is right. We need to move on storage, but not right away. The cost needs to come down. And there's a place in the future for that in his study, in Silkman's study, and in our future. We need to do the things that we can do right now. For example, the offshore wind purchases. What really matters to Maine most is that we build a port where we assemble Habib Dagar's technology, because that not only gives us offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine at a decent price, but more importantly, as importantly, it gives us thousands of jobs for people we have trouble finding jobs for now, people who are just high school graduates. This is the kind of thing that has been, this is a strategy that's 15 years old and well advanced or close. We need to close, we need to finish and not really hope.
Jeremy, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I largely agree with what other folks have already set up here. I mean, I think the bottom line is we've all been on this fossil fuel pricing merry-go-round for a long time. So we know where it goes. Every now and then, you know, it goes right up our side and we feel good about ourselves, and then we forget. And then when the check arrives a couple years later, a couple months later, you know, geopolitical issues or otherwise, and then the problem arises again. So I think one of the things I've been encouraged by with Mills and the legislature is they've essentially said that that's enough. We're not going to continue doing this. And so whether it's an offshore wind procurement, whether it's grid scale procurement, whether it's EG 2.0, whether it's storage, the fact is we need to do it all. This is not, you know, geez, I'm going to pick this one corner of this energy policy and that's the one that's going to win. It's not. The only thing we can be certain about in terms of energy pricing is we're going to be wrong. It's just a matter of how wrong are we going to be. And so one of the ways we can help protect ourselves is have a diverse portfolio of sources that we're seeking to develop. One of the things that you know, I'm going to be talking to Representative Foster and Senator Lawrence this session is particularly around offshore wind, is to make sure that this is truly a really competitive procurement. You know, the university and Habib Dagher deserve a ton of credit in terms of securing a lot of attention from the offshore wind marketplace toward Maine. But their technology is not the only one. And if we're going to drive down offshore wind costs, as we all know that we need to do, we need to make sure that the procurement is truly competitive and that we are bringing in as many companies as possible with lots of different types of floating technologies and bring them in here. And hopefully that will help drive down the costs. It's no disrespect to the university or the great work that they've done, but they're just one. And so, yes, their research array should move forward. Yes, hopefully their technology will work. But going forward, we need to attract literally dozens of companies. So in terms of design ports, I think that's a great idea. In terms of attracting jobs and investment, that's great. My priority is to make sure we're designing a port that works for the offshore wind industry, not just aqualands. The other thing is to talk about what is work. You know, Senator Vitelli sponsored a bill 4 years ago to create a grid scale procurement that some people were concerned might not deliver some pricing benefits. And ultimately, one of the things we've heard from the commission recently is one of the only things that is helping to drive down or keep prices lower than they would otherwise be is the pricing that we receive from those procurements and the projects that are operating. So sometimes it isn't reinventing a wheel, it's making sure that we're doing more of what we know works. And so certainly I think that's a great idea for us to do. I know we'll have a lot of opportunity to talk about distributed generation. The Governor's Energy Office very capably led a very comprehensive stakeholder process, which has produced a report, which presumably at some point they'll be delivering to the Energy Committee. You know, I'm not going to stand up here and say that NEB was designed perfectly, because it wasn't. And no energy policy is designed perfectly. But what I am confident in is that we have done the cost benefit analysis of the 2.0 program, and it is very clearly a winner for consumers. So, you know, that will certainly be up to the legislators on the Energy Committee and the other 173 members of the legislature and the governor to decide when and whether we move forward with a successor program. But I think we've done the homework now, and there's a real opportunity. And then just lastly, the other thing we really need to get honest about is we need to be able to build transmission in the state. You know, everybody wants to do beneficial electrification. We want to do offshore wind. We want to do all of these great things. But until unless we can start building transmission, none of this is going to happen. And so, you know, this is not about Central Maine Power's line or HQ or any of the utilities. It's just a fact. We are going to change the landscape in the state that we live in. So folks better start getting used to that potential outcome if we're actually going to be able to make this clean energy transition.
Go ahead, Tony.
Thank you. I agree with something that Jerry said. Cheers. So here's the thing. We Maine have done some things right. The Northern Maine acquisition is a step in a much better direction than we've taken previously, because it was highly competitive. It attracted multiple bidders. It develops Maine renewables, which are new, and allows them to be used by us. And we get to take advantage of the economies of scale and share it on our terms with those people to our south. This is the result of courage on the part of Troy Jackson and Trey Stewart from Aroostook, the Mills administration, and others to do something right and learn from the mistakes of the past. We can do more of that. Example, we are at an offshore wind moment. I represent, my firm represents the folks who are working with the state to develop the research array. Jeremy argues for competition. I'm confident there will be competition for contracts. But let's keep in mind that the objective of the European developers is to stop Maine from being a key in the development process, because then they can build their platforms in Norway out of steel and float them to the Gulf of Maine. Or if we keep our wits about us, we could build them here and put people to work and create training things like college educations, holidays, families, things that make our society better. That's an opportunity, it's a choice. Competition is important. Apparently in offshore wind, apparently not in that energy billing, but let's not get into that. So let's have competition, but let's have competition with Maine in mind first, because you can be certain that every other country in the world but the United States sees energy as a strategic issue. We see it as a function of the competitive market, and what happens? 60% of Maine right now has an oil burner running. Thanks to the competitive market. We need to act, government needs to act.
I'm gonna pause right now and ask, did Steve, did you want to add in that?
Just a couple of points to some of what we've heard. First of all, we all know what's happening this winter in Maine. And in fact, your and my tax dollars are going to help people who are facing high electric and high heating, whatever the fuel bills, including wood, this winter. And we've raised the level, if you will, of where we will offer that help. And that's taxpayer funded. That's not ratepayer funded for the most part. Secondly, wherever we end up, 10, 20, 30 years from now, we need, and there is no way around the fact that we are going to buy natural gas, number 2 heating oil, and fuels for our vehicles over the next few years. Next winter, we can expect more of the same. We are not going to be at a point with green energy, storage, even hydro or anything else that gets us to where we can throw the switch and say, don't want carbon-based fuels in the state of Maine. So some of what the legislature needs to look at, I believe, is how do we get through this time where that, for example, number 2 heating oil. A lot has been said, and I remind people on the committee, I shipped out for almost 20 years as marine engineer, hold the U.S. Coast Guard chief engineer's license. Then I worked almost 20 years in paper mill and hold a first class stationary engineer's license. But as I reminded people, the state of Maine, one of 2 states that has a high dependency on number 2 heating oil. It's not something where people chose, well, I just want to burn that oil, I could have done something else. Because of our sparse population, like the state of Alaska, it was a convenient, inexpensive system that was placed in homes that were not privy to a natural gas pipeline for that fuel, such as some of the Midwest states, if you will, even the northern tier states were able to do. That's one reason you keep hearing how much heating oil we use in the state of Maine. I agree, we can get away from that, but it's not going to happen in the next 2, 3, 4 years. So we have to look at how to help folks get through that period. And I think Senator Lawrence mentioned that we certainly do need to look at how do we do that as far as helping those folks that are not going to be able to make that transition right away, even if it were available. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a question from the audience? I saw that hand first.
May I use a microphone here?
I can repeat
I'm Nancy Chandler from the Topsom Energy Commission Committee and the Maine Sierra Club. I would like to ask the question of why aren't we talking about energy conservation in the legislature? I've done weatherization programs which are online through Town of Topsom that people can listen to tighten up their house, the efficiency. We need to talk about, everybody in this room needs to go to Efficiency Maine website and see what is available for low-income families. The organization finally realized that if we were really going to save energy in Maine, we have to make it affordable for working class people. So people who make lower income can get 90% of the cost of a heat pump water heater, a weatherization up to $10,000. I mean, it's basically almost free.
Okay, Angie, I think we got the question. Why?
The second question is.
Well, hold on. One question at a time. Thank you. Legislation on conservation and any priorities for conservation.
Sure. We're not on this forum. Nobody's talking about it because the two men between us are working on beneficial electrification for their clients, and that's the majority of the topic. But I assure you, on the EUT committee, we talk a lot about conservation. I mentioned the Efficiency Maine Trust. That's one of the organizations. We deal with a lot of legislation regarding, so I think conservation is going to be very much part of what we discuss. But no matter how much we do on conservation, our society is consuming more and more energy. So we conserve on one side, but unless people want to get rid of the cell phone in their pocket, their laptop, all those things consume energy. And new technology is going to be developed that consumes even more energy. So we got to do both the conservation and the beneficial electrification at the same time.
Thank you, Steve.
Yes, and I think the senator will back me up on this, but in the 130th, we did pass legislation to which gives the Maine Trust ability to put more money into insulating and tightening up homes.
Thank you. I saw one more question right here.
Hi, my name's Meher. I'm from the Bangor Daily News. My question is about net energy billing. We heard a lot about net energy billing today and how it's driving up costs for ratepayers. So what can we attribute that to? Is it largely community solar?
I'm happy to answer that. Net energy billing occurred 4 years ago. We passed the legislation, and it passed overwhelmingly and quickly because of there was 8 years from 2010 to 2018 where nothing was done on beneficial electrification, anything like that. So there's pent up energy in the legislature to do net energy billing, and it was done, and we learned a lesson from it. And I think the lesson primarily that we learned was to give the PUC more flexibility in the ability to set the rates on these types of things for certain types of projects. There's great debate over how much and whether net energy billing is going to cost people in the future. Some people say it's costing us now. I have not seen any of those costs. The costs are likely going to be in what we call stranded costs in the future. But they also don't take into account the fact that in net energy billing, the people who are doing this electrification are reinforcing our distribution systems, not the transmission systems, but the distribution systems within the state of Maine that are badly in need of repair and update. And one of the things we're going to get out of net energy billing for the benefit of Maine consumers is improvements in that distribution system. So we have to wait and see what net energy billing does. We've made some changes. One of the other mistakes I think the legislature made was we tied it to the standard rate offer. And we had no idea that natural gas was going to go up 3 times and the standard rate offer was going to go up and result in this windfall. We're able to work out some of those issues, and we're going to work out some of the other issues, but in the long term, we learned a lot from net energy billing. I don't think it's going to have the massive costs that some people are saying on our electric supply. And I think in the long run, we're going to benefit greatly from net energy billing.
Yes, briefly, from my point of view, the answer to your question is that grid scale solar is coming in at around 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour on the bids for the PUC, and we currently are looking at net energy billing costs of over 20 cents a kilowatt hour, as the senator said, which part of which is a good part of which is due to the fact that it's tied to the standard operating. So
And one point I'll make at that, and actually Tony has a lot to say about net energy billing. So I know he wants to get in here, but net energy billing accounts for such a small portion of our electricity. So 1 to 3%, I'd say, is going to be produced by net energy billing. So it's hard to say that something that produces 1 to 3% is going to result in these massive cost increases. The other thing I'll say, and I sound like one of those financial service commercials on committee. Past prices is no indication of future prices. Past performance is no indication. So grid scale solar could become extremely expensive in the future, and net energy billing could go down in relation. We have no way to predict that.
I'm going to surprise the good senator and just talk about reinforcing what he said we've learned from net energy billing experience. There's nothing inherently wrong with that energy billing. What's wrong is adopting programs that have no controls by humans. Right? Once the legislature enacted the bill, the investment banking firms came in and bought up all the local or most of the local solar providers. And so the $7 billion, $8 billion in profits, in revenues that will go to net energy billing over 20 years will not flow to the benefit of Mainers generally. It will flow to BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and the people who usually benefit from financial gamesmanship. We should learn a lesson from that. Okay? That the PUC needs to have controls. Senator Lawrence has that correctly. But I want to come to another point, and that is, it doesn't really matter who's at fault for net energy billing. Maybe the committee can adjust it somewhat, but what's important is to fix what we can now while the opportunity exists in everything we do. I want to congratulate and thank the ENGOs, Natural Resources Council of Maine, Maine Audubon, and others for joining in the effort to push for a port for offshore wind, where all technologies can be built in Maine, and for acquiring more offshore wind. We're starting to move together, starting to do what Maine does best, which is to cooperate in a few things that can really work. Northern Maine would be another example, right? The Fishing Maine Trust is almost a sacred institution now in Maine, right? We need to stop fighting over the bright, shiny objects like NECEC or public power or these other things, not because they're not interesting and worth talking about, but because they distract us from doing the things that we can do easily and efficiently and successfully and achieve even higher objectives. I want to say, the last thing I'll say, and this is not just a lobbyist blowing smoke, although you know how to do it. Although I noticed the fire went out, actually. This committee is really a good committee, not just these two folks, but the rest of the committee as well. And it's a better committee than last session's, and not just because Seth Berry retired. Just to be clear, that's a friend, but he had an excitement. This committee has people who know how to ask questions. They're not wound up on a particular issue. And I hope everybody here seizes the opportunity to give them your expertise and help them make decisions, because this is a unique moment in our history. We can make some decisions that really make a difference.
Jerry, anything further on that one?
I'm happy to offer something in agreement with Tony there. I think, I'm certainly encouraged that we will have more time in the committee to have conversations around things other than public power. That has been a major distraction and time suck in the committee for years. And so the voters will get a chance to decide if they want to move forward. I mean, there will be a bill that comes before the legislature as well this session. But presumably it will just get punted to the voters and they will get to finally weigh in. Just not having that conversation, the Energy Committee will literally free up dozens of hours of opportunity to talk about grid scale, energy storage, DG, energy efficiency, all of these things. And these are important conversations for us to have. So happy to talk about any of the more in front of the committee this session. I feel like we probably talked about it sufficient enough.
You just opened the door to the other issue, public owner, not just the ones that are in front of us, but is public ownership of either transmission systems or distribution systems or generation part of the mix that you guys see going forward, or is it not?
So on the T and D side, that's gonna be decided by the voters in this referendum. I mean, if I had to go and create a new energy system for the state of Maine from scratch, I would make transmission and distribution a public or quasi-public entity because it is a monopoly. But we're not at that point. And the question is whether trying to convert the private entities now to the public is going to be in the ratepayers' best interest. That's going to be a decision by the voters, and we'll have to address whatever happens. On the supply side, in my prior incarnation in the legislature, when I was in the legislature and Senate president, was when we separated supply and transmission and distribution. And I will say that was a good idea because it's created great competition in supply and kept down prices. But what we lack right now is a planning function. And that's what we're struggling to do and to come terms with in the legislature is we need a planning function on what supply is going to be produced out there. Are we going to overproduce supply? Are we going to meet our climate change goals? Because the marketplace alone doesn't get us there. We have to have some utility and electricity planning to say this is where we want to be on the supply side in 10 to 20 years.
Representative Foster.
Yes, I agree mostly with Senator Lawrence. I do think that, I think when deregulation was passed, I was just a kid then. My understanding is that one legislator, see him on Sunday mornings, watch the right news, who voted not to deregulate. I have questions in my mind whether that was the best avenue or not. And Senator Lawrence told me before that it saved money on generation. But it did cause a big gap, if you will, between generation buying that and planning the T and D portion and their workings. They no longer have to worry about the whole picture. And as an engineer, and especially in being in the private sector for so many years, I knew that there was a project ahead of us. In order to get the financing for that, I had to know from the first dollar that was spent on the engineer that was going to start the planning to the product being delivered and seeing that it was successful and being profitable. There was a lot that came into play, and I have brought up on this committee, and I did not come into this arena because I wanted to be a politician. I was volunteered by the gentleman who held my seat before and had retired and agreed to do it for a while. But I was amazed that we did not have a plan. And anybody who's paid attention to the Energy Committee, I know that young Dan Burgess is tired of the question when I asked, do we have an engineer working in the governor's energy office? Because any of you that have been in that field understand, when you set out to do something, you have to look at all the parameters, whether it's offshore wind, and do we have a place to build it? And I'll give you a good example. I asked the natural gas supplier that had looked at putting a line up through on the coast of Maine up through Thomaston. When they pulled their plan because of folks in that area saying we don't want that. Did anybody talk to anybody else about the fact that we want to have a place up in Searsport that will take all kinds of Maine-made cement, concrete from Thomaston, and the fact that they would be able to use that natural gas to fire their kiln instead of the fuels that they use now, when that plan was being decided to be pulled? And the answer was no. So that's the kind of broad plan that we need.
And that's but we are close to doing a lot of things really well. You know, frankly, when you start to talk about public power, my face aches. And I have a right to have my face ache. I ran the 1973 public power campaign in Maine. It would have taken over the generation of all electricity in Maine. You know what? Since 1973, no utility has built a power plant in Maine, so it was pointless. Okay? We need to focus on the things that are smaller and better and achievable for Maine. And that, you know, let's take the lithium. I know nothing about lithium. I thought it was a drug. Okay. To me, the question is, how could you mine lithium? Not why should we mine lithium? Okay. How could we do that and increase the supply of rare metals necessary for beneficial electrification? Let's turn Maine around from a place that can stop anything to a place that can do more. We're that close. That's really going to make a difference to your families.
Thanks. Did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, just real quick. You know, I don't think, you know, public ownership of generation is a good idea. I think the legislature made the right decision 20 some odd years ago. I think that has been proven out time and time again, that competition in generation space makes good sense. And maybe to echo what Tony was just referencing, you know, I'm fearful of what happens to our clean energy transition if the voters decide to move in a consumer-owned utility direction. We've heard the utilities say, and it makes perfect sense to me, they're going to sue. So we're gonna end up in the courts for 5, 10, 15 years. And then what happens to all of these good things that we're talking about, from heat pumps to energy storage, to offshore wind, to DG, to grid scale? What happens? My guess is nothing. And, you know, we're all up here at this, you know, up here, and you all are out there because we're all in agreement that we need to do something. And being stuck doing nothing is unacceptable. We already know where that's going to take us. We're going to be continued to expose to volatile pricing structures, which impacts constituents, citizens, ratepayers, everybody. So, you know, I'm really fearful what happens, and, you know, I'm certainly hopeful that as voters start to hear, you know, learn more and more about the possibility of a consumer utility and what that means for them and what that means to our other energy priorities, that ultimately it's not a good idea. But it is tantalizing, right? You know, you've had the House Chair of the Energy Committee for 5 or 6 years talking about how great and easy and wonderful this will be, and it'll be cheaper, better, faster. And I just don't think that's true. But it is a very difficult conversation to have with the average Mainer who doesn't really understand the electricity industry. I didn't understand it before I started doing renewables. My understanding of the energy industry was when I went into my bedroom, I put the light switch and the lights come on.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Probably evidenced by some of the early testimony I delivered, but the average person doesn't take time to learn about it. And so, you know, I'm hopeful that as voters become more informed and educated throughout the campaign, you know, this summer and fall, that they'll learn that this is ultimately not in their best interest, but, you know, time will tell.
Okay. Senator, do you want the last word? Are we good?
Sure, I'd be happy to mention just a couple of things to everyone. First of all, a couple of things that haven't been mentioned in this is we need to look at thermal energy production too as well. Thermal can save and produce energy as well. And in this mix, as we look to renewable energies, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, both are interruptible, and we have to look at storage, but we need to keep in mind the best storage is hydroelectric. And we have Hydro Quebec, and I know it's a controversial issue because of the corridor up to our, as our neighbor, but that is a huge battery for us. And if we can somehow work through those political issues, that we can say to them, okay, we're not producing wind, can we have some power? And then now we're producing enough power, let your dams fill up. That would be a great solution. We spent all our time on electricity, but I want to propose to you, if you're watching the committee, watch broadband. It's extremely important what's going to happen in broadband in the state of Maine. And I know they're dull issues, but sewer and water we're going to deal with. We have ancient systems in the state of Maine, and they stand in the way of economic development in the state of Maine. The good news is COVID is over. We're back in person, and so much more gets done in the legislature when we can have small conversations that happen. So I encourage you to participate in the process and be involved in those small conversations that go on, because they're very beneficial to the committee members.
Great way to end. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Senator Lawrence, they don't call Senator Dad for nothing. At first, I couldn't move your car because the emergency brake was properly set. You have a wonderful parking space right out front here. Thank you so much to our panelists. You guys have been wonderful. Thank you to Burston, Pierce Atwood, Stantec, Northeast Clean Energy Center. Don't run off. We have the room until 11. We're getting a coffee refresh. Thanks for supporting E2 Tech. See you at future events. Thank you to moderator Bill Ferdinand.
Yeah, correct. Great to listen to you. You will.